The performance of the company, with your first quarter numbers, the group CEO says that the good performance, of course, you posted almost 2 billion naira. Your revenue was up more than 100%, 116, almost 120%. The CEO says that was made possible, quote, by the successful restructuring of the company in 2016. Explain to us what some of this restructuring you did and what's been the outcome of them.
Okay, some of the challenges that the company had prior to 2016 was things like the level of leverage that we had as a company.
That's indebted.
Yeah, the indebtedness that the company had. We had some assets that we didn't think were necessarily a strategic fit with the future of the company. And those things, more or less, were some of the things that were weighing down the company's performance. A decision was made to let go of some of those assets. So, for example, last year we let go of the energy services company. The energy services company is the company that services all companies in the oil fields. We decided that the capital requirement was not something that we would be able to meet, and so it was best to let it go. We disposed of a fairly substantial part of our ownership of the downstream company. That's the gas owning stations. At that point in time, we disposed of about 60% of our ownership of the company. And towards the end of last year as well, we disposed of about 70% of our ownership of the gas pipeline business, OANDO Gas and Power. The effect of all those things is we were able to generate quite a bit of capital. The capital that we generated enabled us to pay down quite significantly the amount of debt that we owed the banking industry. So in 2015, we owed in dollar terms, about $2 billion. Today, our indebtedness is just north of $700 million. And the reduction in the debt was driven mainly by the proceeds of the disposals we made.
One of the allegations by the SEC was that of financial misstatement. Did you misstate your financials at any point in time?
We did not misstate our financials at any point in time, but let me clarify that a bit further. The major driver of the allegation is the fact that sometime in 2013 or 2014, we disposed of a company called OANDO Energy Exploration and Production Limited. At that point in time, the disposal was made. An agreement was reached between the parties, that's ourselves and the buyers, that a number of approvals were to be obtained subsequent to the transaction. So when, for example, the asset had an oil pipeline license, an oil mining lease, and because it had that, it meant that the approval of the DPR and the Minister of Petroleum was required. And the other approval that would have been required would have been the approval of the Securities and Exchanges Commission, because it was the disposal of a company in Nigeria. We agreed that those approvals were going to be conditions subsequent to the transaction and not precedent to the transaction. So the conclusion of the transaction was not predicated on those approvals.
Was that communicated to the SEC?
It was not communicated to the SEC because it wasn't required at that point in time. Because at that point in time, there were other approvals that we were seeking from the Minister of Petroleum, and which were not forthcoming, and which was quite public at that point in time. That's the disposal of the acquisition of the ConocoPhillips assets. One of the things that we did, not to muddy the waters, was to step down, at least temporarily, the approval from the Minister of Petroleum for that particular transaction, while what we thought was a much more important transaction was actually pushed through. Eventually, when we got that, the buyer decided that there was too much time lapse, and as a result, they weren't willing to go ahead with the transaction. What we had to do at that point in time was to then reverse the transaction to effectively nullify the transaction. We nullified the transaction, and one of the things that's required is for us to then look at any transaction that you nullify or you reverse and estimate what the impact would have been at that transaction that you nullified had it not gone through at that point in time, when it initially you took it through. And we restated our financials just as a result of that. We restated the financials for 2013 and 2014 as a result of that. Now, the challenge that we then had was, as a result of the disposal of that asset in 2013, the company made a profit. And due to the demands of the shareholders, and we decided to declare a dividend. When we then reversed that particular transaction, the effect was that instead of a profit, the company would have made a loss.
But you've declared dividend?
But we had already declared dividend.
And you paid the dividend?
And we paid the dividend. And so that
And you can call the dividend back?
The dividend can be
You can call it, back.
Back.
So you are therefore in a bit of a problem there. So how did it pace out?
Well, at any point in time, the actions of people can only be judged by the fact that at their disposal at the time those actions were taken. At the time the action was taken, we understood that we had a profit. We understood that there was a transaction that had already gone through. And we believed that the shareholders were due a dividend, and the dividend was paid.
I got a very key question. This time I got to be up. There's an issue of going concern. Is OANDO Nigeria PLC a going concern or not?
OANDO PLC, as of end of 2016, there were concerns about the going concern, and I would explain a bit. There were 2 or 3 things that really drove the issue of going concern. One was the fact that we had our net current assets were fairly significantly below our net current liabilities. The other one was the fact that we had reported losses for a number of years. Now, let me take the first one. One of the drivers for the net current assets, the third issue was the issue of leverage. The issue of leverage, I've already spoken about the fact that we've actually done quite a bit since 2015 to reduce the leverage of the company. And I must say that even in 2017, there are other steps that we've taken to further reduce the leverage. So that's the leverage on one side. The other one is the issue of the net current liabilities that the company had. That was basically partly driven by a technicality. A technicality in the sense that one of our facilities in the upstream had what you call a technical default. A technical default in the sense that some of the leverage, some of the target leverage covenants that we're supposed to meet were not met. It was a technicality. And generally, what happens when you've got things like that is that you then assume that if that deficiency is not corrected, there is the possibility that the lending banks could call on the facility. If they did call on the facility, then it meant that even what normally is not a current liability, effectively are allowed to treat as a current liability. I had a 5-year facility, and the portion of that facility that was due over 1 year, effectively I had to reclassify into this year.
We have to take a break.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming on the program. We got more questions, but Ayotola Jagon, who is the Chief Compliance Officer and the Company Secretary of OANDO Nigeria PLC, we answer some of those. That's Femi Adeyemo, the Chief Financial Officer of OANDO Nigeria. Let's take a break. We're back in 2.